I'm here to talk about inclusive trade and prosperity across our hemisphere. And I don't think there's been a better time to talk about that, honestly. I've been appointed Minister of International Trade by Prime Minister Trudeau, and I get to go at a number of venues where I meet colleagues just like yours around the world. And one simple thing Prime Minister Trudeau asked me is to make trade real for people. This is the bottom line. This is how we're going to get through. And I just want to talk a bit more about that today. But first of all, I want to thank you, Susan, for your kind words. We learned that we both speak Italian. You know, before that, we just had a chance to chat and discovering that we have much in common for the kind words of introduction that you've said about me. I would say, well, good evening, but good afternoon to all of you. I know it's been a long day, and I'm about the last one before dinner, so bear with me for, they gave me about 15, 20 minutes and then a Q&A. But I just want to say thank you for all being here, elected official, business leader, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very, very pleased to be part of today's event. So bonsoir, bonjour tout le monde. Merci d'être là en grand nombre. C'est évidemment un énorme plaisir pour moi d'être avec vous aujourd'hui comme ministre du Commerce international du Canada. I'm sure you expected with a name like Champagne that I would do at least a few words in French as Canada's International Trade Minister. So let me begin by thanking the Council of the Americas team for organizing this conference and inviting me to join you today. It's a great honor to have this opportunity to speak to you about Canada's strong and growing relationship with our friends and partners in the Americas. Canada believes that our shared prosperity lies in openness and the pursuit of freer trade between nations, and we have never shied away from saying so. Trade has always been in the DNA of Canadians. Canada represents about what? 0.5% of the world population, and we represent about 2 to 2.3% of world trade. So we are, by definition, a trading nation, and that's why we feel bound to talk about progressive trade and really pursuing the inclusive trade agenda around the world. I'd say, ladies and gentlemen, what our country lacks in terms of large domestic market, we make up for with a diverse and entrepreneurial population that has always raised their ambitions beyond our borders. We know that companies that export benefit from increased sales, higher profits, and greater competitiveness, all of which helps them grow. And when companies grow and succeed, they create new jobs. And this is something that is true in Canada, is true around the world, and particularly in the Americas. A number of us have been elected about making sure that we work, that we make trade work for social inclusiveness in our country, to create jobs, and make sure that we have an agenda that will benefit consumers, exporters, and obviously consumers. In January, I became Canada's Minister of International Trade, but effectively, media at home called me the Chief Marketing Officer of Canada. Since then, I've visited about no fewer than a dozen countries on almost every continent, including Chile and Mexico in March. I've used every opportunity to promote open markets and to establish stronger commercial ties with Canada's trading partners, and you are representing many of these nations with whom we want to have closer trading relationship. I also made it a point during all my travels to promote Canada's progressive approach to trade, and I'm very encouraged by the reception and how it's resonating around the world. Canada's progressive trade agenda is making its way. More and more people are understanding the benefit and how, when you have the social license, you can pursue an ambitious trade agenda. You see, I think we need to think differently about how we pursue trade. If we are not in the business of securing the social license to pursue an ambitious trade agenda, then, ladies and gentlemen, we will succumb to the forces opposed to it. Now more than ever, we must work harder to make the case for trade and to make trade real for people. And I'll tell you an example. When I attended the first WTO meeting after Davos last year, I was the last minister to speak as being the newest one in the room, and none had mentioned the word people in their speech. I just put it to the members to say, why don't we have a WTO for the people? Because after all, that's the reason why we're attending these meetings. So what is progressive trade, and why does it matter to Canada? And why should it matter to you as well, my friends? At its most basic level, progressive trade is about ensuring that all segments of society can take advantage of and otherwise benefit from the opportunities that flow from trade and investment. In practical terms, that means we focus our attention more on the interests and ambitions of smaller companies, including those owned by women, youth, new immigrants, and indigenous entrepreneurs, putting them front and center to help them reach their true full potential. There is no easy way to rebuild people's trust in the global trading system. But we can start by putting the interests of families and workers first and doing everything we can to make trade work for the middle class. I know we are all trying to grow because they are, after all, the backbone of our respective economies. Trade must support inclusive growth, and its benefits must be more widely shared. Many Canadian companies, like Tech Resources in Chile, have adopted innovative approaches to sharing the benefit of trade in the markets where they are established. I was very pleased in my very first meeting in Chile to meet with Tech and UN Women when I was in Chile in last March to learn more about the partnership they formed last year to empower indigenous women in the northern regions of the country. This great project seeks to promote capacity building among indigenous women and address the barriers to their active political and economic participation. Tech has told me that building bridges with community, it's part of its corporate approach, and it's really having a truly positive impact on individual families and Chilean society as a whole. I highlight this story not only as an example of how inclusive trade can be put in practice, but also to show you the power of partnership. And I believe there's so much more we can be doing together across our hemisphere to ensure the future prosperity of our people. When it comes to trading partnerships, no two countries have a stronger relationship than Canada and the United States. Last year, the U.S. sold U.S. $322 billion worth of goods and services to Canada. So let me remind that to our U.S. domestic audience. The U.S. sold $322 billion worth of goods and services to Canada last year alone. It is estimated that almost $1.7 billion worth of goods and services cross the U.S.-Canada border every single day. That means our two countries have done what? Roughly 7 million in business in the 5 minutes or so that I've been speaking. And since I took probably more time to get there in the speech, I'm sure it's about 8 million as opposed to 7 now. But it's just to show you the strength of the relationship between Canada and the United States and the strength of the economy that we have built together in this hemisphere. Canada is the #1 customer for most U.S. states. Actually, 48 states in the United States have Canada as their primary, secondary, or tertiary market. So we are not just trading with each other, we're making things together. That's the real distinction in our relationship. For example, we continue to be the #1 export market for Florida's agricultural products, fueling economic growth and job creation in that state. In total, nearly 9 million jobs in the U.S. are supported by trade and investment with Canada. This is the strength of the relationship we have. But we do much more than simply send goods and services across the border. We build things with each other and with Mexico. That's the great aspect of our trading relationship that I keep reminding, is that we make things together. Our supply chains are really, truly integrated for the benefit of consumers. All three of our countries are part of the same North American production platform with fully integrated economies, supply chains, and logistic processes that crisscross the continent. Recently, they were giving me a picture, I think it was a landing gear, and they had put the cities of where the parts were coming. This almost looked like the United Nations of North America. you could see the number of cities that goes into a landing gear manufacturing. So is that a Canadian, US, or Mexican product? That's a North American product. That's the strength of the relationship we have. NAFTA has made this high level of integration possible, and in the process has helped create the biggest, most competitive economic region in the world. Our combined trading relationship reached almost $1 trillion in value last year, and almost fourfold increase compared to 1993, the year before NAFTA came into force. So imagine, Canada, US, Mexico, almost $1 trillion of trade in goods and services. This is extremely significant, ladies and gentlemen. Canada believes that NAFTA has been an excellent agreement and has benefited all sides, including the United States. We also believe that NAFTA continues to be the best interest of Canada, the US, and Mexico as a trilateral agreement. One of the great things that NAFTA has done is to bring Canada and Mexico much closer together. And I must say to our Mexican friends, I had the chance to fly back with Luis when we came back from Chile, and Ildefonso, which hosted me in Monterrey, and I must say the relationship between Canada and Mexico has never been better. Trade between our two countries has grown so much since NAFTA was put in place that today Mexico is Canada's third largest trading partner. In many ways, Mexico also become a bridge to our neighbors in Latin America as a whole. What started with NAFTA 2+ decades ago has developed into an extensive network of free trade agreements spanning the entire region. During my trip to Chile in March, I celebrated the 20th anniversary of our free trade agreement, Canada's first with a country in Central or South America, and one we currently are working to modernize with our Chilean friends. And speaking of partnership, our work on modernization is already looking at specific ways we can ensure progressive elements like a gender chapter. A gender chapter are included to make sure our agreements always put people front and center. And I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, we're making good progress with that. Today, Canada has 7 free trade agreements in force with 8 countries in the Americas, 7 with 8, obviously, because NAFTA is 3 countries, plus 9 separate investment protection agreements in the hemisphere. Together, these agreements have set the stage for a huge growth in trade and investment. Two-way merchandise trade between Canada and the Latin American Caribbean region was $63.6 billion in 2016, an increase of 62% over the last 10 years. Meanwhile, Canadian firms are a major investor and job creator in the region, to the tune of $250 billion in Canadian direct investment at the end of 2015. Calgary-based TransCanada, just for example, has been doing business in Mexico since the mid-90s and now employs some 2,000 workers across the country. This is trade which works. Canadian companies are also big players in the region's clean tech, ICT, and obviously in banking and financial services sector. For example, in banking, our own Scotiabank, something you would know, Madam President, is by far the largest Canadian bank in Latin America and the Caribbean, with a presence in the region dating back to 1889. So our trading relationship started a long time ago. Today, the 4 Pacific Alliance countries are a big part of its growth plan. The most attractive emerging markets for Canadian business are right here in our own hemisphere. Latin America is home to growing economies, and the region, as you all know, has experienced a middle-class surge in recent years. According to a World Bank study, the middle class in Latin America grew by more than 50 million people in the decade between 2002 to 2012, and now represents 30% of the population. Mexico's middle class alone is now bigger than Canada's entire population. With a rising middle class comes higher living standards and more purchasing power, as well as new energy and transportation infrastructure requirements in the region. Canadian companies have the skill and capacity to help meet those needs, from high-quality food and consumer products, to banking and financial services, to modern and reliable infrastructure and innovative energy solutions. Those are the things that we need to be talking about in this hemisphere. There are just a few examples of the tremendous synergies between our countries and our economies. We also have strong and growing people-to-people ties and share a similar time zones and business cultures. All of those things make us ideal business partners. That's one reason we are ramping up our engagement with our friends in the Americas, and that's my presence here today. Prime Minister Trudeau made an official trip to Latin America last November, visiting Cuba, Argentina, and Peru. Argentina is already an important market and commercial partner for Canada in its own right, and as a member of Mercosur. This regional bloc is a major economic player in Latin America, with a combined GDP last year of $2.4 trillion, and a population of 260 million people. While in Argentina, Prime Minister Trudeau committed to maintaining an ongoing dialogue on deepening Canada's commercial relationship with Mercosur, and a relationship that was valued at more than $8 billion in two-way merchandise trade last year. In recent months, Canada and Mercosur, and I'm pleased to report to you, ladies and gentlemen, have sought to reassess the potential for an ambitious and mutually beneficial free trade agreement. And we are now consulting with Canadians to seek their views on such agreement. Let me turn to Central America. In Central America, we have recommitted energy and some of our best human resources, like Ambassador Deborah Chastis in Guatemala, who is vigorously promoting our progressive trade agenda. On the other side of South America, Canada looks forward to deepening its ties with the regional bloc known as the Pacific Alliance. Canada has already a successful free trade agreements with all 4 countries members of the Pacific Alliance. But we can always do more to strengthen our trade links, and I'm sure, ladies and gentlemen, you would all agree with me on that. And we are very excited by the untapped potential for business partnership that we have seen in the Pacific Alliance, with its growing middle class and open, market-driven economies. Canada has been a strong supporter of the Pacific Alliance from the time it was founded in 2011. We were the first non-Latin American observer to the group in 2012. And last year, Canada was so pleased to sign a joint declaration on partnership with the Pacific Alliance, the first agreement of its kind to be signed by the Alliance and one of its observer nations. Ladies and gentlemen, we share common values with the Pacific Alliance. This is where it starts. We also have a shared global of greater regional economic integration and free trade that can help create more jobs and opportunities for the middle class. And I'm sure you're here today because you share that same desire. In conclusion, whether it's the EU, Mercosur, China, or elsewhere, Canada is working hard to realize an ambitious agenda of trade diversification. This includes pursuing new markets for softwood lumber, given the recent U.S. duties. We believe those duties to be unfair and unwarranted, and we are taking steps to defend our industry, as you would do if you were in the same position. And we will do exactly the same for dairy producers in Canada. While the U.S. will always be a natural market for Canadian export, there are lucrative opportunities around the world for Canadian companies today, especially as Canada seeks to open and deepen our trading relationship with a larger proportion of the global economy. NAFTA has shown that openness will lead to development of global value chains. And these value chains offer the best chances for smaller companies and those led by women, youth, indigenous people and other underrepresented groups to plug into the global economy and reap the benefits of trade. Canada's progressive approach to trade is the way to get there and to create the inclusive growth and prosperity for the people in the hemisphere. I hope that our friends in this room and across the Americas will join Canada in this journey. Once again, I want to thank the Council for the Americas for the kind invitation to join you today. I want to thank you. Merci. Gracias for the great work you do to promote stronger ties throughout the America. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll leave you with three things. Let's seize the moment. Let's be ambitious. And together, let's make sure that trade works for people. Thank you very much.